He was 5 years old. And he hadn't spoken in 18 months. Every expert failed. Every specialist gave up. His father, a mafia don who controlled an empire, was powerless. Then she arrived. A humble nanny. No credentials. No experience. But she had something the others didn't. A secret. The don had killed her brother. She wasn't there to heal the boy. But when the boy finally spoke, his first word wasn't mama. It wasn't papa. It was a name. A name that exposed a betrayal. A name that shattered everything. Welcome back. Today, we're diving into the complete story of a silent boy who witnessed a murder, the ruthless Italian Mafia Don desperate to save him, and the humble nanny who arrived with a deadly secret. A mission of revenge. 18 months of silence. And a truth that would shatter everything they thought they knew. Grab your seat, hit that subscribe button, and let's get started. Patricia Garcia knelt beside 5-year-old Angelo Romano, watching him clutch his gray rabbit in silence. 18 months. Not a single word since his mother died in an explosion meant for his father, the most feared mafia don in Rome. Every expert had failed. Every therapist, every specialist, every desperate attempt to reach the traumatized boy had ended in silence. But Patricia wasn't there to heal Angelo. She was there to destroy the man who'd ordered her brother Luca's execution. As she pressed the tiny listening device beneath the windowsill, Andrea Romano stood watching from the doorway. The powerful man who made grown men tremble was now helpless before his son's grief. Signorina Garcia, his voice was rough with desperation. You have 3 days to make my son speak. Patricia looked up at him, her face a mask of compassion hiding years of rage. Don Romano, perhaps everyone has failed because they tried to make him speak. Angelo doesn't need another voice. He needs someone who will listen. The words hit Andrea like a bullet. His wife Mia's last argument echoed in his memory, his refusal to listen to her concerns about that fatal trip. His failure to listen had cost him everything. He didn't know that this humble nanny had come to take even more. But what Patricia didn't know was that Angelo had witnessed something the night his mother died. Something that would shatter everything she believed about the man she came to destroy. The boy's silence wasn't trauma. It was testimony. And the real monster wasn't who anyone thought. What do you think Angelo witnessed that night that everyone missed? Drop your answer in the comments below. Patricia Garcia followed Ronaldo through the silent, oppressive luxury of the villa's private wing. The head of security moved like a shadow, his powerful build and blank expression signaling danger far more clearly than any raised voice ever could. He paused outside the modest quarters assigned to her, blocking the doorway with his considerable frame. The Don requires you to understand the gravity of your failure, should you fail, Ronaldo stated, his voice a low, heavy weight that seemed to press against her chest. If the boy suffers further harm, physically or emotionally, the consequences will be severe, Signorina. Very severe. Patricia met his gaze directly, suppressing the instinctive flare of hatred that threatened to surface. This man was part of the machine that had crushed her family, that had stolen everything she loved. I understand the gravity of harm, Signore, she replied, her voice steady and appropriately humble. I am here because I believe I can alleviate it, not cause it. Ronaldo studied her for a long moment, then stepped aside without another word. Once alone, Patricia leaned against the thick ornate door, allowing her carefully composed facade to crack slightly. Her hands trembled as she reached into the single-worn duffel bag she'd carried and pulled out a small, creased photograph, Luca Garcia. Her brother. His face, kind and boyish with that crooked smile she'd never see again, beamed up at her from the brittle, yellowed edges. Luca, a minor figure caught in a shipping dispute he'd known nothing about, had been executed 18 months prior by Don Andrea Romano's direct order. Collateral damage. An acceptable loss in the Don's world of power and violence. Luca's death was the silence that had shattered her life, the wound that would never heal. Vengeance is cold, Luca, she recited the mantra she'd whispered every night since his death. He will pay for the life he so casually took. I promise you. Her deepest desire burned like a flame in her chest, justice for Luca and the complete destruction of the man who wielded such indifferent, brutal power. Her greatest fear, the one she fought against every moment, was the growing realization that the true victim of her revenge, Angelo, was utterly, devastatingly innocent. A child traumatized by the same violence that had killed her brother. But the mission was paramount. She was here to infiltrate, observe, and eventually dismantle everything Andrea Romano had built. She would use his love for his son as the weapon that destroyed him. Patricia entered Angelo's room the next morning armed with nothing but a sketchbook, charcoal sticks, and an absence of expectation. She didn't approach him. She didn't offer cheerful greetings or forced smiles. Angelo, still huddled in his defensive corner clutching his tattered rabbit, watched her with those grave, dark eyes that had witnessed far too much for a 5-year-old. Patricia simply sat on the floor several feet away, completely ignoring the expensive toys scattered around the room. She didn't speak to Angelo. She didn't try to coax him out. She just began to draw the room itself, the oversized furniture that dwarfed the small boy, the dancing shadows that crept across the walls, the massive ceramic lion mounted near the window with its fierce, frozen expression. Then she drew the space next to it, a gaping, black void. Angelo's silence was not defiance or stubbornness. It was trauma, pure and devastating. The experts had failed because they demanded a verbal response to a silent wound. They had tried to fix him with words when words were the very thing that had failed him. Patricia began to speak, not to Angelo directly, but to her drawing, as if narrating her thoughts to the paper itself. "This house is very loud, isn't it?" she murmured, charcoal scratching softly against the rough paper. "But not with sounds. It's loud with waiting. Everyone waiting for you to speak. Waiting for the silence to stop. Waiting, waiting, waiting." She then drew Angelo's rabbit. But she didn't draw a happy, cheerful bunny. She drew a rabbit hiding beneath a fallen leaf, its eyes wide with terror, peering out at a monstrous shadow that loomed over it. Slowly, imperceptibly, Angelo moved. He didn't come closer to her, but he turned his body, his head tilting slightly, watching her drawing process with those intense, unblinking eyes. Patricia knew instinctively that she was sketching the monster that lived inside his memory, the one that had stolen his mother, the explosion that had taken Mia and stolen his voice. The first true breakthrough came when Patricia deliberately drew a small, crude picture of a boy, meant to represent Luca, giving a triumphant high five to an unseen friend. She sighed dramatically, her shoulders slumping, then tore the page out and crumpled it into a ball. "That drawing is wrong," she said, frowning at the discarded paper. "It needs more light. More hope." Angelo's hand twitched. Then, for the first time since she'd entered the room, he performed a voluntary action. He pointed a small, shaky finger at the discarded crumpled paper, indicating clearly that she should keep it. The silent command, the first flicker of genuine engagement, felt like a thunderclap in the quiet room. Patricia's breath caught in her throat. She nodded slowly, carefully uncrumpling the paper and smoothing it out with reverent hands. "You're right," she whispered, her voice thick with unexpected emotion. "We don't throw away the light. Even when it's hard to see." That same thunderclap of recognition hit Andrea Romano an hour later in his private study. He wasn't physically in the nursery, he was watching the live feed from concealed cameras he'd had installed months ago. He watched Patricia, simple and unassuming in her plain dress, gain more ground in one afternoon than 18 months of certified therapy had achieved. She wasn't coaxing or cajoling. She was reflecting his son's fear, giving it shape and form, making it something Angelo could finally see outside himself. Ronaldo stood beside the bank of monitors, his face professionally blank. "She is unorthodox, Don Romano. But undeniably efficient." Andrea didn't look at his security chief. His gaze remained fixed on Patricia's image on the screen. The way she handled the charcoal was too precise, too controlled. Her movements contradicted the soft, nurturing role she was playing. He felt a sharp, unexpected tug of attraction warring with deep, consuming suspicion. Why is she so calm? Every other woman who'd entered his home, his late wife's friends, the previous nannies, the therapists, had been either terrified of him or manipulative, angling for money and position. Patricia was neither. She was simply there, working with a quiet dedication that unnerved him. Later that evening, alone in his study, Andrea opened the comprehensive file on Patricia Garcia. The background check was frustratingly clean: orphaned young after her parents died in a car accident, raised by her older brother Luca Garcia, deceased, dropped out of nursing school due to lack of funds, worked at various charity clinics. She was utterly, completely unremarkable. Yet as he reviewed the footage of her sitting alone with Angelo, a memory surfaced unbidden, the moment she'd spoken that devastating truth to him in the Great Hall: "You have failed to listen." Andrea ran a hand across the stubble, darkening his jaw, his mind racing. His deepest fear, losing Angelo, his only family, the last piece of Mia he had left, was the only lever that mattered anymore. If this woman could save his son, he would pay any price, make any sacrifice. But if this humble nanny was merely a disguise, if she was manipulating his final desperate hope, he would destroy her without hesitation or mercy. He picked up his encrypted phone and made a call to his most discreet investigator. "Run the name Patricia Garcia again," he ordered, his voice low and dangerous in the dim study. "And this time, don't look for what she's hiding. Look for who she loved. Find out who she's lost." The fear of losing his son was now in direct conflict with his suspicion of the only woman who seemed capable of saving him. He knew she held the key to healing his heir. But he feared she might also be the one to finally, completely break the unbreakable Mafia Don. The tension in the Romano villa was a taut, invisible wire strung tight between Don Andrea's demanding presence and Patricia's quiet resolve. 3 days had passed without a single word from Angelo, but Patricia was achieving micro-victories the previous experts had completely missed: a slight shift in posture when she entered the room, a momentary focus on her hands as she drew, the acceptance of a different blanket she'd offered. Andrea watched her constantly on the surveillance monitors, his deep suspicion warring violently with the fragile hope that bloomed every time Angelo didn't immediately recoil from her presence. The inciting incident arrived not as a dramatic confrontation, but as a violent shift in the weather itself. A massive, sudden thunderstorm tore across the Roman landscape, plunging the villa into a dim, uneasy twilight. The wind howled like a primal beast around the thick stone walls, and the sharp crack of thunder seemed to shake the very foundation of the ancient structure. In the nursery, the terrifying noise immediately shattered the fragile peace. Angelo, who had been quietly stacking small wooden blocks with Patricia just moments before, threw his hands over his ears. His eyes widened in absolute terror, his entire body going rigid, and a high, choked sob caught painfully in his throat. He bolted toward his favorite corner, his protective sanctuary, but in his panic, he missed his footing and collapsed hard onto the plush rug. His breathing became shallow, ragged gasps that tore from his small chest. It was his first full panic attack since the previous nanny had resigned in tears 3 months ago. Patricia moved instantly, her limited training from nursing school kicking in with sharp clarity. She didn't call for a guard or demand a doctor. She knew instinctively that this was a moment of pure, blinding fear that required quiet immersion, not external chaos and adult voices. She didn't try to pull him out of the corner or force him to look at her. Instead, she knelt beside him on the floor, keeping a respectful distance, and began to sing. Her voice was low, slightly husky, and utterly unsuited for grand performance, but it was real, human, and warm. It was a simple, repetitive folk song from her childhood, one Luca used to sing to her when they were children huddled together in their cramped apartment during violent storms that rattled the windows. She sang of rolling green hills and quiet harbors where boats rested safe from the waves, letting the gentle rhythm push against the jagged, violent sound of the thunder outside. As she sang, she slowly reached out, not to touch Angelo's trembling body, but to gently, carefully rub the worn back of the small rabbit he clutched desperately against his chest. "The rain cannot hurt us, little one," she murmured softly, weaving the words into the rhythm of the storm. "We are safe here, inside where it's warm. We are just listening to the music the sky is making." In his private study 3 floors below, Andrea saw the panic unfold in real time on the monitor. He surged to his feet, his chair scraping violently across marble, barking sharp orders to Ronaldo to stand by with the doctor. His heart slammed against his ribs like a prisoner trying to escape. He had witnessed these attacks before. They left Angelo physically ill and psychologically regressed for weeks afterward. But then, he watched Patricia. He watched her ignore the prescribed protocols and simply sing. He watched her sacrifice professional distance to offer genuine human comfort. She wasn't treating a patient with clinical detachment. She was nurturing a wounded soul. The song she sang was simple, deeply familiar, and profoundly tender, a sound utterly alien to the cold, efficient violence of the Romano household. He saw the gradual effect on his son. Angelo's breathing slowly, impossibly, began to deepen and regulate. He didn't unclench his white-knuckled hands from the rabbit, but his head turned slightly toward the sound of her voice, and he began to rock subtly, unconsciously synchronizing his small movements to the melody she offered. The song ended as the thunder faded to a distant, harmless rumble. Patricia stopped singing but kept her hand resting gently, protectively on the rabbit. She looked down at Angelo, and her eyes were filled with an authentic, unmasked compassion that pierced straight through Andrea's carefully constructed defenses. In that quiet moment of shared relief, the survival of his son through another crisis, something shifted. Andrea felt an undeniable, magnetic attraction to her fierce protectiveness, her warrior's courage wrapped in a caregiver's gentleness. She was a simple nanny with no credentials, but she had the steel spine of a soldier and the tender heart he thought had died with Mia. Then it happened. Angelo, weak and exhausted from the attack, slowly drew his head away from his knees. He looked up at Patricia's face with those grave, dark eyes now heavy with fatigue. And then, so soft it was almost lost beneath the settling rain drumming against the windows, he whispered a single, precious word. It wasn't complex. It was simply the name of his beloved rabbit. Whisper. In his study, Andrea gripped the edge of his desk so hard the cold marble bit into his palms. The word was rough, the vocal cords unused and hesitant, but it was there. Angelo had spoken. The miracle he had bought with millions of euros in desperate bargaining was delivered by a humble nanny and an old folk song about harbors. Andrea burst into the nursery moments later, Ronaldo shadowing him silently. He didn't speak, he couldn't trust his voice. He simply knelt beside his son and pulled Angelo into a fierce, shaking embrace. Angelo accepted it, his small arms wrapping around his father's neck for the first time in 18 long, silent months. In the euphoric chaos of the reunion, Patricia stepped back carefully, letting father and son have their desperately needed moment. This was her chance. She moved swiftly to the corner where she'd been sitting, ostensibly bending to pick up the charcoal stick she had deliberately dropped. She had designed her plain uniform herself, personally sewing a small, reinforced compartment into the lining of her skirt. Her movements were seamless, born of weeks of private practice in her tiny apartment. Her hand slipped smoothly into the hidden lining, withdrew the minute listening device no larger than a button, and quickly pressed its adhesive backing beneath the heavy dark oak windowsill, the perfect blind spot invisible to both the room's camera angle and any physical security sweeps. The planting of the device was her first decisive strike. The relief and growing affection Andrea was feeling were being weaponized against him. Patricia felt a grim, cold satisfaction settle in her chest. The silence she had broken in Angelo was nothing compared to the devastating secrets she would extract from this house. Andrea stood up slowly, his face etched with raw emotion Patricia had never expected to witness, a volatile mixture of profound relief, fierce possessiveness, and something dangerously close to wonder. He looked from his son to her, his dark eyes blazing with intensity. "You succeeded," he breathed, the words heavy with disbelief and genuine gratitude. "You have achieved what everyone else failed to do." He took a deliberate step toward her, his proximity suddenly overwhelming in the small nursery. Patricia knew instinctively that she had to solidify the deception, cement her position. She met his gaze directly, not with humble submission, but with shared, weary relief. He was always ready to speak. "Don Romano," Patricia whispered, her voice intentionally husky with emotion. He only needed permission to break his silence. Andrea reached out, not to shake her hand professionally, but to gently, almost reverently brush a strand of hair back from her temple. It was an unexpected gesture of profound, shocking intimacy. His touch was warm, possessive, and electric against her skin. "You have it, Patricia," Andrea murmured, his thumb briefly, deliberately caressing her cheekbone. "You have my complete permission to do whatever is necessary for my son. You are no longer just hired help. Now you belong to this house. You belong to us." The romantic tension snapped tight like a wire, laced with danger and unspoken promises. Patricia held her breath, acutely aware that she had just secured her position deep within the enemy's fortress, and successfully armed her revenge. She had moved past his suspicion and into the far more lethal territory of his trust. Angelo finally spoke his first word after 18 months of silence, but it was during a terrifying storm. "Why do you think trauma sometimes needs to be confronted rather than avoided? Share your thoughts below." The success of the whisper moment transformed the entire atmosphere in the Romano villa. The air was no longer thick with paralyzing hopelessness, but instead vibrated with strained, watchful hope. Andrea's immense relief translated immediately into a dangerous, almost suffocating possessiveness over Patricia. He kept her close, ensuring she had every resource she needed for Angelo's care, yet demanding precise, detailed reports of her methods and progress. Patricia's daily routine became a precarious high-wire act of deception. By day, she was the humble, dedicated nanny, gently guiding Angelo back into the living world using quiet games, painting sessions, and long walks through the villa's gardens. She learned quickly that Angelo's mutism wasn't a simple failure to speak, it was a deliberate refusal to repeat the words of a world that had violently betrayed him. He started drawing full scenarios now, small, vulnerable figures surrounded by massive, menacing shadowy threats that loomed over them like dark clouds. By night, Patricia transformed into a meticulous spy. After Angelo was safely asleep, she would carefully retrieve and listen to the recordings from the device she'd planted on the windowsill. The conversations were frustratingly fragmented, heavy with coded language and obscured by the static interference of the old villa's thick stone structure. She was listening desperately for Andrea's confession, his definitive statement confirming the cold, ruthless execution order of Luca Garcia. The romantic subplot deepened dangerously through these shared shadows. Andrea began appearing in the nursery late at night, long after Ronaldo and the perimeter guards had completed their final security rounds. He came ostensibly under the pretense of checking on Angelo, but his dark, intense eyes never left Patricia. One evening, he found her sitting quietly by Angelo's bedside, sketching in her worn notebook by lamplight. "He drew a boat today," Andrea murmured, standing close behind her chair, his body heat radiating near enough to make her skin prickle with awareness. "A large boat, moving deliberately away from a storm." "He's starting to trust the distance," Patricia replied softly, not turning to look at him. "He needs to understand that he can leave the place where the pain lives. That he doesn't have to stay trapped there forever." Andrea's large hand came to rest briefly on the back of her chair, his fingers nearly brushing her shoulder. "You are remarkable, Patricia. You see things no one else does, not the doctors, not the specialists." His gaze intensified. "You even see things in me that others miss. What do you see when you look at me?" Patricia turned slowly, meeting his penetrating stare with carefully controlled composure. "I see a man who has signed orders to eliminate rivals without hesitation," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, deliberately testing him. "But I also see a father absolutely terrified of losing the only family he has left in this world." The conflict, the raw, undeniable growing attraction warring against her absolute knowledge of his violent past, made the air between them impossibly thick. Andrea's hand moved from the chair to her shoulder, a gentle yet unmistakably territorial touch. It was simultaneously a clear warning and an expression of potent desire. They were caught in a dangerous emotional loop, their relationship growing organically from shared vulnerability and constant, looming danger. The simmering tension exploded violently several days later. In the dead of night, the villa's oppressive silence was brutally shattered by the piercing wail of security alarms and the distinct, terrible staccato of automatic gunfire echoing through the stone corridors. A rival family, sensing weakness from persistent rumors about Andrea's unstable, silent heir, had launched a targeted, brutal assault on the villa's vulnerable East Wing. Andrea instantly transformed from grieving father to commanding Don, barking razor-sharp orders. "Ronaldo! Secure the perimeter immediately. Move Angelo to the reinforced safe room, now!" But before Ronaldo could reach the nursery, the electricity failed completely, plunging the entire wing into suffocating blackness. Patricia didn't wait for orders or permission. She grabbed Angelo, wrapping him tightly in his favorite blanket, and retreated swiftly to a small, hidden storage closet concealed behind the heavy wall tapestry, a space she'd discovered during her surveillance of the room. The terrifying sounds of the raid, harsh shouts in Italian, breaking glass, explosive gunfire, were frighteningly close, just beyond the nursery walls. Angelo started to hyperventilate, his small body trembling violently. Patricia pressed him firmly against her chest, covering his ears with her hands, and whispered Luca's lullaby over and over until her throat was raw and dry. When Andrea finally burst into the nursery minutes later, his expensive suit torn, his face smeared with soot and streaked with the wild adrenaline of combat, he found the room completely empty. Cold, absolute panic gripped him, a terror he hadn't felt since the night Mia died. Then he heard it, the faint, high-pitched sound of a lullaby coming from behind the tapestry. He tore the heavy cloth aside violently, finding Patricia pressed protectively against the wall, her body serving as a human shield for Angelo. "Are you harmed?" Andrea demanded roughly, his voice raw with barely controlled fear. "No," Patricia replied, her eyes wide with lingering terror but her grip on Angelo unwavering and fierce. "He didn't cry. He stayed quiet and brave." Andrea didn't speak another word. He simply pulled them both forcefully into the massive, armored safe room down the corridor. In that dark, confined space, as the sounds of violent battle raged somewhere outside the reinforced walls, their hands found each other in the darkness, a silent, desperate promise of mutual survival. Andrea was astonished by her courage, her instant protective loyalty toward his son. His trust in her instincts solidified completely in that moment. In the chaotic aftermath of the raid, while Andrea was consumed with securing the compromised estate and orchestrating brutal punishment for the rival family, Patricia finally had precious time to analyze a critical piece of wiretap recording she'd saved from the night before the attack. The conversation wasn't between Andrea and a subordinate as she'd expected. It was a hushed, clipped phone call that sounded far too secretive, too deliberately brief. The voice belonged unmistakably to Ronaldo. Ronaldo was speaking to an unknown third party about Mia's security detail, the detail Ronaldo himself had personally controlled, just days before her death. The words were frustratingly cryptic, the package was delayed. The Don was expecting full coverage. It wasn't my fault the timing failed. More damningly, Ronaldo spoke directly of Luca Garcia's execution. The Don signed the final order, yes, but the intelligence information. It was deliberately rushed. He never had time to double-check the source or verify the threat assessment. Patricia played the damning snippet again and again, her hands trembling. The recording didn't absolve Andrea, he had still signed her brother's death warrant, but it planted a terrifying alternative possibility. It suggested strongly that Andrea had been misled or deliberately manipulated by a trusted insider regarding Luca's supposed threat. If Ronaldo had fabricated evidence to force Andrea's hand, and if he'd also compromised Mia's security, then the entire foundation of her revenge was built on sand. Her internal conflict raged violently. Am I hunting the right monster? If Ronaldo orchestrated Luca's death to weaken Andrea's judgment, and if he engineered Mia's death to destabilize the family, then destroying Andrea would only serve Ronaldo, the true traitor. Her carefully planned revenge was being tested by uncomfortable truth, and her unwavering commitment to Luca's memory was being challenged by her growing, deeply conflicted affection for Andrea and her fierce, protective love for innocent Angelo. The tension had reached its breaking point. She was no longer just a spy operating with clear purpose. She was trapped dangerously between two powerful men, fighting desperately for a traumatized child who held the last key to all their devastating secrets. The high tension following the brutal rival raid had stripped away all formalities between Andrea Romano and Patricia Garcia. They were no longer Don and Nanny, master and servant. They were two people fighting in desperate tandem for the survival of Angelo, the little boy who had become the fragile, precious nexus of their entire world. Patricia had spent the last week intensely focused on the drawings Angelo produced daily. They were becoming clearer, less nightmarish and monstrous, but one recurring element remained hauntingly consistent, a dark, imposing figure always standing ominously near a beautiful woman, presumably Mia, just before an explosion of jagged, violet black lines consumed the page. Patricia realized with chilling clarity that Angelo wasn't just mute from trauma. He was a silent eyewitness to something terrible. Today, she tried something radically different. She brought a large, sealed wooden box into the nursery and placed it ceremoniously in the center of the soft rug. "This is the memory box, Angelo," Patricia whispered, her voice gentle yet purposeful. "It doesn't have bad things trapped inside. It holds the things we lock away because they're too big and heavy for our small hands to carry. Today, we're going to put the monster's picture in the box where it can't hurt you anymore." Angelo watched intently, his dark eyes wide and utterly fixed on her movements. He drew the shadowy figure one final time, a crude portrait of pure menace, and Patricia carefully, reverently placed it inside the box. As she did so, she began humming the familiar lullaby, Luca's song, her revenge motive momentarily eclipsed by her fierce, protective need to free this wounded child. Andrea, observing from the private viewing room through the monitors, felt a powerful surge of helpless love wash over him, for both of them. He was supposed to be analyzing security breach reports and planning retaliation, but he couldn't tear his eyes from the tender scene unfolding. "I want her to stay," he thought desperately. "I don't care about secrets anymore. I only care that she stays." His earlier paranoia about the Garcia surname had been temporarily buried beneath profound gratitude for his son's miraculous progress. Patricia closed the box with a soft click and looked directly at Angelo. "Now, we're going to put something powerful inside, a word so big and strong, it can scare away all the shadows forever." She gently prompted him to think about the strongest, safest person in his entire life. Angelo's breath hitched audibly. He looked at Patricia with those impossibly serious eyes, then glanced toward the closed door where he somehow knew his father often stood watching. Then, slowly and deliberately, he raised his small head and looked Patricia straight in the eye. He didn't whisper hesitantly like before. He spoke. The sound was thin and unused, but perfectly, beautifully clear, delivered with forceful, shaking determination. "Daddy." The single word, spoken clearly for the first time in 18 endless months, was a declaration of trust, a thunderclap of triumph. He reached immediately for Patricia, burying his face in her dress, then looked toward the door again, wordlessly demanding the presence of the man who represented his safety. Andrea didn't wait a single second. He threw open the nursery door and rushed in, nearly colliding with Ronaldo who had hurried up the stairs behind him. He scooped Angelo into his arms, fierce tears burning behind his eyes for the first time since Mia's funeral. "You spoke," Andrea choked out, his voice breaking as he held his son desperately tight. "You spoke, figlio mio. You're back." Patricia stood back, watching the raw, beautiful reunion unfold. "I did it," she thought, bittersweet victory flooding her conflicted heart. The revenge feels meaningless compared to this healing. She loved this child fiercely, and in that profound moment, she was perilously, dangerously close to loving the flawed, vulnerable father as well. It was precisely at this height of emotional chaos that the devastating midpoint revelation struck like lightning. Ronaldo, ever professional and unervingly composed, stepped forward deliberately. He didn't acknowledge Angelo's miracle. He completely ignored the profound joy saturating the room. "Don Romano," Ronaldo said coldly, holding out a small sealed evidence bag containing the listening device Patricia had planted. "I found this hidden beneath the nursery windowsill during my security sweep. It's a state-of-the-art recording device. And I also found this, sir." Ronaldo then presented a printout of the complete, non-redacted background investigation on Patricia Garcia. The damning paper showed her nursing school identification photo, her original home address, and critically, her listed next of kin, Luca Garcia, deceased. The name Patricia was simply a feminine variation of her brother's name, an obvious alias in hindsight. Andrea's world, already shattered open by overwhelming joy, imploded completely. He looked from the simple, kind woman who had just miraculously saved his son, to the printout proving her calculated infiltration, to the recording device confirming she'd been spying on him from the beginning. His eyes, dark as midnight and twice as cold, fixed on Patricia with laser focus. The profound relief and gratitude vanished instantly, replaced by cold, lethal fury that made the temperature in the room plummet. The sister, Andrea breathed, the words a terrible, damning accusation. "You're the sister of the man I ordered killed. You came here to avenge him." Patricia stood frozen, her carefully constructed world collapsing. The sheer devastating scale of the discovery, at the exact pinnacle moment of Angelo's healing, was crushing. She couldn't deny the truth. She couldn't offer hollow apologies. She could only hold her gaze steady, a volatile mixture of guilt and fierce defiance warring visibly across her face. "Yes," she admitted, her voice shaking despite her best efforts. "I came here for justice. For my brother." Andrea slowly, deliberately lowered Angelo, handing the confused, frightened boy to Ronaldo. He took a predatory step toward Patricia, the dangerous Don violently overtaking the grieving father. His face became a terrifying mask of wounded, barely controlled rage. "Justice?" Andrea's voice was dangerously, deceptively low. "You infiltrated my home. You deliberately manipulated my son's deepest despair. You let me touch you, trust you completely, only so you could destroy me from the inside?" He didn't wait for her answer. He seized her roughly, pulling her hard against his furious body. The contact was violent, possessive, fueled by passion born of ultimate betrayal. His mouth crushed down on hers, not a kiss of love or tenderness, but a desperate, furious claim, a raw physical manifestation of his raging internal conflict. He wanted to punish her, yet his traitorous body only craved the one person who had truly witnessed his vulnerability. Patricia responded instantly, equally desperate, unable to stop the undeniable desire that had been building relentlessly since the storm. It was a kiss of confession, of shared devastating loss, and of total, catastrophic doom. When he finally tore away, his eyes were savage and wounded. "Take her," Andrea commanded, his voice raw with unbearable pain, gesturing sharply toward Ronaldo. "Lock her in the tower suite immediately. She saved my son's voice, but she has utterly destroyed mine." Patricia was dragged away forcibly, her heart literally tearing between the pure joy of Angelo's spoken word and the complete despair of her own fatal failure. She had achieved her mission of infiltration and gathered damning evidence, but she had lost her moral high ground, her clear purpose, and her treacherous heart in the devastating process. The tower suite was not a simple prison, it was a gilded cage designed for quiet, elegant confinement. The walls were lined with expensive silk wallpaper, the windows offered a breathtaking panoramic view of Rome's ancient skyline, but the heavy electronic locks on the door confirmed Patricia Garcia's devastating new reality: she was utterly trapped. She sat motionless on the edge of the large, soft bed, the residual heat of Andrea Romano's furious kiss still a phantom presence burning on her lips. Despair, cold and suffocating, settled over her like a heavy shroud. The sweet, fragile triumph of hearing Angelo say "Daddy," just hours earlier was now completely eclipsed by the catastrophic failure of her revenge mission. "I failed you, Luca," she thought bitterly, pressing her face into her trembling hands. Her singular desire for justice had led her not to truth, but to the deepest level of deceit and manipulation, harming the innocent boy she had grown to genuinely love. The wiretap recordings that had suggested Ronaldo's possible treachery were now useless evidence. All Andrea could see was the spying device and the vengeful sister of his victim. She had sacrificed her integrity, her honesty, for a revenge that was now entirely meaningless. Her deepest fear had materialized with brutal clarity: she had become the very monster she'd sought to destroy, coldly manipulating a grieving, traumatized child to satisfy her own agenda. The oppressive silence outside her locked door was somehow louder and more terrifying than the gunfire during the raid. It was the sound of a life collapsing completely, of hope dying. Below in the nursery, the atmosphere had become suffocating and thick with dread. The explosive joy that had erupted with Angelo's single precious word had been brutally extinguished, replaced by devastating, twofold anxiety that permeated every corner of the villa. Andrea paced his private study like a caged, wounded lion, alternating frantically between reviewing the damning background report on Patricia and staring at the live security feed of Angelo's empty room. He had banished Patricia to protect himself, but the moment she disappeared, Angelo's delicate recovery reversed with terrifying speed. Angelo refused all food. He refused to look at Ronaldo, the man Andrea had trusted implicitly to protect his family. He didn't cry or scream, he simply retreated entirely into himself, sitting motionless in his familiar corner, his gaze vacant and unreachable. The word Daddy was gone, erased, replaced by a silence more profound and stubborn than anything they'd witnessed before. The expensive doctors returned with grave expressions etched on their faces. Don Romano, the severe stress of the traumatic event, coupled with the sudden, complete absence of the person he'd formed a primary attachment to, this is significant regression, the lead specialist warned carefully. He's bordering on complete psychological shutdown. Physically, he's actively rejecting all nourishment. If he doesn't begin to communicate or accept comfort very soon, we'll need to resort to invasive medical intervention. Andrea dismissed the doctors with a curt wave. He leaned heavily against the cold marble wall, the crushing weight of his catastrophic failure pressing down on his chest. He had chosen control over healing. He had chosen suspicious paranoia over fragile hope. He had destroyed the one person who could actually reach his son, driven by a sense of betrayal that somehow felt more devastating than even Mia's violent death, because this betrayal was personal, intimate, and deliberate. I should have killed her immediately, the Don's ruthless survival logic demanded coldly. But I can't. Because Angelo needs her. The brutal confrontation forced Andrea to face his deepest, most paralyzing fear. His obsessive need for absolute power and swift vengeance was actively destroying his only remaining family. His pride, his ego, was literally killing his son. In the cold darkness of the tower suite, Patricia's despair reached its breaking point. She pressed her face against the frigid glass window, hot tears finally flowing freely, mourning both the life she'd irreversibly lost and the innocent one she couldn't save. She had to save Angelo. Her brother's cold memory was meaningless comfort compared to the frantic, immediate need of the living boy she loved fiercely. She began searching her luxurious prison frantically for any possible way to communicate. Her desperate eyes fell on the simple secured phone Ronaldo had placed beside the bed, a monitored line strictly for requesting basic necessities. It was useless for escape, but Patricia wasn't thinking about escape anymore. She was thinking about her final crucial clue. She remembered the strange background noise on the wiretap recording from before the raid, the muffled conversation where Ronaldo had mentioned both Luca's intelligence files and Mia's compromised security detail. The distinctive noise had been the sound of a loose, jingling key, a master key that only Ronaldo, as head of security, would possess and carry. Patricia quickly dialed the extension for Andrea's private office, knowing full well that Ronaldo would be monitoring every word. But she had to gamble everything on this final move. Andrea answered immediately, his voice rough with exhaustion and barely controlled fury. "What do you want, traitor?" "I want to save your son," Patricia shot back fiercely, cutting straight through his rage. "I didn't come here to kill you, Andrea. I came to find the truth about what really happened to Luca. But there's a bigger, more dangerous liar living in your house, and he's systematically killing your son." Silence. Andrea roared into the phone. "The truth is in the report. You are the infiltrator. You are the traitor. The key, Andrea." Patricia yelled desperately into the receiver, using the strange specific detail she'd carefully noted from the wiretap. "Ask Ronaldo directly about the missing master key to the auxiliary storage room where the original files are kept. He was careless on that call, and now he's frantically covering his tracks." If you personally check the security logs of who accessed the original intelligence files on both Luca and Mia before their deaths, you will find your real answer. Ronaldo is the one who betrayed you. Ronaldo is your enemy. She slammed the phone down hard, her heart pounding violently against her ribs. She hadn't provided irrefutable proof, only a cryptic, desperate accusation based on fragments. She knew Ronaldo was listening to every word, and she had just signed her own death warrant. But she had successfully shifted Andrea's singular, focused rage from her personal betrayal to the terrifying possibility of a deeper, long-term internal conspiracy. She sat back heavily on the bed, utterly spent and exhausted. The situation appeared completely hopeless. She was imprisoned, Ronaldo knew she'd discovered his involvement, and Angelo was fading rapidly. But for the first time since Luca's senseless death, she had acted not for cold revenge, but for genuine love. This confrontation with her deepest fear, sacrificing the mission for the boy, was her moment of absolute moral reckoning and desperate transformation. Andrea Romano was a man built on certainty. His entire world was constructed on clear loyalties, explicit commands, and verifiable data. Patricia's desperate, fragmented accusation, the cryptic mention of the missing key and the auxiliary storage room, was not verifiable data. It was the desperate gambit of a captured enemy. Yet it struck him precisely where he was most vulnerable. His suspicion of Ronaldo had been quietly simmering ever since Patricia first arrived. Ronaldo was too efficient, too perfectly controlled, always conveniently present at critical moments. More importantly, Ronaldo had been the one to discover the listening device, the one to deliver the damning full report on Patricia, and the one whose security protocols had been mysteriously compromised during both the recent raid and Mia's death 18 months ago. Andrea spent the entire night sleepless in his study, staring at the surveillance screen showing Angelo, motionless, pale, barely breathing in his bed. He knew with crushing certainty that time had run out. His heart, the part he'd believed was solid stone, demanded he risk everything on a hunch, because the alternative was the certain death of his only remaining family. He summoned Ronaldo at dawn, keeping his face expertly blank, radiating lethal, deceptive calm. The external file logs, Andrea commanded, his voice completely devoid of emotion. I need every access log for the security data on the Mia Romano incident and the Luca Garcia file for the last 2 years. Cross-reference them against all internal key fob registrations. Ronaldo's impeccable composure wavered for 1 microsecond, the slightest hesitation, the briefest tightening around his eyes, but he recovered instantly, his mask sliding back into place. Don Romano, that seems redundant. The system is clean. We thoroughly verified all file access after the Luca Garcia incident. Do it now, Andrea hissed, his eyes hardening to black ice. Or I will have every guard in this compound do it, starting with your personal records. Ronaldo bowed with perfect compliance, yet that single moment of hesitation had been noted and filed away. While Ronaldo was occupied running the impossible audit, Andrea made a calculated risk. He called the head locksmith and demanded an immediate emergency inspection of the villa's auxiliary storage unit, a secure room Ronaldo frequently used for what he called inventory management. The locksmith's findings arrived 20 tense minutes later, a simple maintenance report that completely cracked the foundation of the Romano Empire. The report confirmed 2 devastating points. A specific electronic master key to the auxiliary storage room was officially listed as lost and had been permanently deactivated 18 months ago. The digital logs revealed persistent, unauthorized access attempts to that same room's security system continuing until last week, suggesting someone was desperately trying to use an old compromised code, unaware the physical key had been reported missing. Patricia hadn't accused Ronaldo of finding the key. She'd accused him of losing it and frantically covering up the loss. Andrea's sharp mind spun rapidly, connecting the dots Ronaldo had so expertly buried. The missing key pointed directly to Ronaldo's desperate attempts to access old, sensitive unfiltered data, likely the original incident reports on Mia's death and Luca Garcia's execution, reports that would exonerate Andrea's judgment and point clearly to Ronaldo as the source of deliberately falsified intelligence. Ronaldo had systematically orchestrated both tragedies to consolidate power and position himself as Andrea's only reliable man standing. Andrea's focus shifted instantly from betrayal by his nanny to the lethal treachery of his most trusted subordinate. The rage over Patricia's spying was immediately eclipsed by the overwhelming need for justice and, more critically, salvation for his dying son. Andrea strode purposefully toward the tower suite, his face a grim mask of absolute resolve. When the heavy door hissed open electronically, Patricia stood immediately, her face pale but her resolve visibly unbroken. Andrea didn't apologize for his previous rage or the imprisonment. He simply tossed the locksmith's damning report onto the table between them. The auxiliary master key, he stated flatly. Ronaldo reported it lost exactly 18 months ago. He's been the one desperately trying to access the original unaltered files ever since. Patricia read the report quickly, the devastating truth washing over her in waves of profound, cold relief mixed with fury. Luca's execution had been a calculated setup from the beginning. Andrea was a dangerous man, yes, but not the specific monster directly responsible for her innocent brother's unjust death. He used Luca as a pawn, Patricia whispered, her voice thick with pain and anger. He fed you deliberately falsified intelligence, hoping to weaken your position by making you appear ruthlessly careless. And he was directly involved in Mia's death. He personally controlled her entire security detail that night. Andrea finally surrendered completely, letting his carefully constructed defenses crumble in front of the only person who truly understood the impossible stakes. He looked her straight in the eye, the true Don, vulnerable and determined, finally emerging. He is actively killing Angelo, Patricia. Angelo won't eat anymore. He won't respond to anyone. He needs you, Andrea admitted, his voice rough with shame and desperation. He didn't ask for forgiveness, only help. You were right about everything. I failed to listen. I failed my wife, I failed your brother Luca, and now I'm failing my son. I need you to save him. He opened his hand, palm up, a silent, absolute surrender of his legendary control. Patricia met his gaze directly, the revenge mission now completely irrelevant and meaningless. She didn't seek to punish him anymore. She sought to save his family, their family. She took his offered hand, the shared touch cementing their desperate partnership. Angelo needs to see Ronaldo exposed and removed, Patricia said, her fierce determination returning. But Ronaldo knows I've discovered the truth. He won't surrender quietly. He will try to silence us both before we can act. They quickly formulated the dangerous plan. They had to move immediately, before Ronaldo realized his elaborate deception had been fully exposed. They couldn't simply arrest or execute Ronaldo, he was too deeply embedded, too powerful within the organization, and his dramatic downfall needed to be definitive and witnessed by the entire syndicate. The solution had to come directly from Angelo himself. They decided to deliberately lure Ronaldo into the nursery under the false pretense of escorting Patricia out of the villa permanently. They would carefully recreate the scene of the original trauma, banking everything on the slim, desperate chance that confronting the actual source of his fear would snap Angelo out of his dangerous regression. It's too risky, Andrea argued, his protective gaze fixed on the terrifying idea of deliberately endangering his vulnerable son again. It's the only way left, Patricia countered firmly, placing both hands on his tense shoulders. Angelo has reclaimed the word daddy. Now we need him to give us the name of the real monster. We need him to give us the truth about what he witnessed the night Mia died. As they stepped out of the tower suite together, walking side by side down the corridor, the sight of the ruthless Mafia Don and the humble Nanny standing united against the internal threat was powerful. They walked deliberately toward the nursery, ready for the final, catastrophic confrontation that would determine everything. The nursery was meticulously prepared for the final confrontation. The room that had witnessed so much silent grief was now deliberately set as a stage for justice. Andrea Romano gave the household staff a carefully crafted cover story. Patricia Garcia was being escorted out for questioning following her betrayal, a strategic move designed to lure Ronaldo into believing the threat had been completely neutralized. Ronaldo arrived promptly, radiating cold, professional satisfaction. He had controlled the information flow in the villa for years, masterfully manipulating events from the shadows. He believed the Don was merely settling a debt and sending the troublesome Nanny away to be permanently silenced. "The secure transport is ready, Don Romano," Ronaldo reported smoothly, his voice perfectly controlled. "The woman will be placed on a private plane to Naples within the hour. She will not trouble you or Angelo again." Andrea stood motionless by the tall window, his gaze fixed intently on his son. Angelo sat quietly on the plush rug, trapped in a state of regression worse than anything before Patricia's arrival. He was completely unresponsive, pale, and heartbreakingly small. Patricia knelt beside him, holding his cold hand gently, whispering soft encouragement. This carefully feigned stillness was the bait. "I will personally ensure the exit is swift and discreet," Ronaldo continued, taking a proprietary step toward Patricia. He needed to guarantee she never spoke about the missing key or the damning original file logs. "No," Andrea said quietly, his voice calm as he finally turned from the window. The dangerous calmness was absolutely lethal. "I want you to bring the transport vehicle to the main front entrance. I want to properly say goodbye to the one woman who brought my son the closest to genuine healing. And I want Angelo to witness it." Ronaldo frowned, clearly disturbed. "Don Romano, that is ill-advised. The boy's fragile psychological state." "Do exactly as I command," Andrea cut him off sharply, the cold absolute authority of the Don suddenly filling the room. As Ronaldo retreated to execute the unusual command, Andrea looked directly at Patricia. Their eyes met across the room, a silent vow of cooperation, shared fear, and unexpected love. They both knew this was the moment of no return. 10 tense minutes later, Ronaldo returned. He stood imposingly by the nursery door, impatience barely masked by his professional posture. "It is time, Signorina," Ronaldo said coldly, extending his hand toward Patricia in a gesture that was more threat than courtesy. Patricia stood slowly, placing both hands protectively on Angelo's small shoulders. She leaned down, whispering fiercely into his ear with desperate urgency. "Be strong, little one. The monster is here in this room right now. You need to tell Daddy his name. Tell him the truth." Then she walked deliberately toward the door, purposely ignoring Ronaldo's outstretched hand. Andrea stepped forward, placing a firm hand on Patricia's arm as if physically restraining her. "Before you leave permanently, Patricia," Andrea said, his voice carrying clearly across the entire room, "I want the complete truth. Did you genuinely believe I killed your brother Luca simply out of malice and cruelty? Or did someone deliberately feed me a convenient lie designed to weaken my trust in my own men?" The question was the carefully placed tripwire. Ronaldo's practiced calm shattered visibly. His eyes darted instinctively to the security camera, confirming it was still transmitting the live feed to monitors throughout the entire estate. He couldn't allow the Don to air this devastating doubt publicly. "Don Romano, you are clearly distraught," Ronaldo interjected quickly, stepping into the room and abandoning his strategic post by the door. "This woman is a vengeful assassin's sister. She is obviously lying to save herself." "Am I?" Patricia challenged him directly, pivoting to face Ronaldo, her face alight with righteous fury. "Or is Ronaldo the man who personally signed off on the fatally flawed security detail for Mia's transport that night? The one who planted falsified intelligence files to cover his trail? The one who lost the master key to the auxiliary storage room?" Ronaldo's eyes went wide with shock and rage. He lunged toward Patricia violently, abandoning all pretense of loyalty and control. "You venomous liar," he roared, his mask completely fallen. "You couldn't possibly know anything." He seized her arm brutally, attempting to drag her forcibly from the room, his violent rage eclipsing all caution and strategy. Andrea moved instantly, pulling a concealed firearm from inside his suit jacket and aiming it directly at Ronaldo's head. "Let her go immediately, Ronaldo," he commanded, his voice a low, terrifying growl. "You just confirmed your guilt with your own words." But the real dramatic culmination wasn't the threat of gunfire. It was the profound effect of the violent confrontation on Angelo. The little boy, who had been completely catatonic just hours earlier, was now witnessing a terrifying, visceral recreation of his deepest trauma, an aggressive male figure, explosive chaos, furious yelling, and the immediate threat of violence near the woman who protected him. Angelo watched Ronaldo intently, the man who controlled the household's information flow, the man who had been there that terrible night 18 months ago. The sound of Ronaldo's enraged roar was the final trigger that unlocked everything. All the months of suffocating silence, all the accumulated fear and grief, all the unspoken devastating truth burst forth in a single, desperate, raw sound. Angelo screamed. It wasn't a wordless cry of pain. It was a name, the crucial name he had kept locked away since the day his mother Mia had died. He screamed the one name the entire villa had been desperately waiting to hear, the name that proved the ultimate betrayal. Ronaldo. No. Mia. The small boy, his face contorted in a powerful mix of terror and triumph, had finally broken his silence. In that single moment, the silent heir delivered the key eyewitness testimony that saved his father and exposed the traitor. Angelo hadn't just regained his voice, he had become the hero of the Romano family. Ronaldo froze completely, every careful pretense shattered. The boy hadn't just spoken, he had given the devastating eyewitness account. Ronaldo was directly involved in the security failures that led to Mia's death. The internal betrayal was complete and irrefutable. With Angelo's testimony echoing powerfully in the room, Ronaldo knew his elaborate game was finished. He lunged one final desperate time, not at Patricia, but directly at Andrea. Andrea fired a single, clean shot, ending Ronaldo's threat decisively and permanently. True silence, lasting and peaceful, finally fell over the room. Andrea stood over Ronaldo's neutralized body, the weapon heavy in his hand, but his eyes were fixed entirely on Angelo. He dropped the gun immediately and rushed to his son, sweeping him into a tight, tearful embrace. "You are safe now, figlio mio," Andrea choked out, burying his face in Angelo's dark hair. "You spoke the truth. You saved us all." Angelo clung to him desperately, still trembling, but the paralyzing terror was gradually giving way to exhausting relief. He looked over Andrea's broad shoulder directly at Patricia. Patricia's mission of revenge was finally resolved, not by her violent action, but by the truth and the boy's courageous healing. She had achieved justice for Luca, who had been falsely implicated by Ronaldo's manipulation, and she had redeemed Andrea by forcing him to confront the devastating truth he'd been blind to. Months passed in a quiet, profound wave of healing. The villa, once a suffocating mausoleum of silence and suspicion, now resonated with the beautiful sounds of recovery and new life. Ronaldo's devastating betrayal had been publicly exposed, delivering a clean, necessary cut to the internal rot that had festered within the Romano syndicate. The truth, testified to by a single brave word from a 5-year-old boy, had cleared Luca Garcia's name within the family and secured Andrea's position, ironically by showcasing his profound vulnerability rather than his legendary power. The most dramatic change, however, was in the transformed dynamic of the household itself. Angelo was thriving magnificently. The paralyzing fear that had kept him bound in silence had been named, confronted, and removed. He talked constantly now, not in hesitant whispers, but with the boundless energy and curiosity of a child finally, gloriously free. He laughed, he demanded stories before bed, and he drew vivid pictures filled with golden sunlight, sailing boats, and most importantly, 2 strong protective figures always holding hands. Andrea Romano himself had profoundly changed. The Mafia Don remained a ruthless protector of his empire, but he was no longer ruled by the cold need for absolute control. He had learned the terrifying lesson that true power lay not in commanding silence, but in listening carefully to the smallest voice. He reserved his mornings exclusively for Angelo and Patricia, joining them for breakfast and often watching their games with a small, genuine smile replacing the perpetual scowl of the grieving widower. The relationship between Andrea and Patricia had transformed completely. The furious passion born of betrayal and desperation had matured into deep, unwavering trust forged in the crucible of shared fear for Angelo. Patricia no longer felt the burning need for revenge consuming her. Luca's precious memory was honored, not by Andrea's destruction, but by the fact that the Don had humbled himself, risked everything, and ultimately achieved justice based on Patricia's courageous guidance. Her mission had resulted in redemption, not annihilation. One quiet evening, Patricia found Andrea waiting for her in the vast, echoing library. He wasn't reviewing business documents or taking urgent calls. He stood by the crackling fireplace, holding a single worn piece of paper, the crumpled drawing of the fearful rabbit and the shadowy monster she had sketched on her very first day. "This is how you first spoke to him," Andrea said softly, his voice filled with wonder. Not with professional rules or techniques, but with genuine empathy. He looked at her directly, his dark eyes intense but stripped completely of the Mafia Don's usual pretense. He was simply a man, a devoted father, standing before the woman who had saved his family. "When you first arrived, Patricia," he continued, taking a deliberate step closer, "you said you came for justice. I understand that completely now. Justice for Luca, for Mia, and for Angelo. You delivered it all." He reached into the pocket of his tailored jacket, not for a weapon, but for a small, simple velvet box. This was not the lavish, transactional proposal expected of a powerful Mafia Don. It was a deeply personal, vulnerable plea for a shared future. "Luca's death was a catastrophic failure of my command, driven by a traitor I should have recognized," Andrea admitted, his voice rough with lingering regret. "I cannot change the past or undo that pain. But I can ensure that the family you saved, the family Luca would have wanted you to have, is secure and loved forever." He opened the box carefully. Inside lay a ring, not a gaudy oversized diamond, but a delicate antique band of woven gold, intricately interwoven, symbolizing two lives eternally entwined. "I offer you a new contract, Patricia Garcia," Andrea said, his voice breaking slightly. "Not a contract of employment or obligation, and certainly not a contract born of fear. But a sacred contract of family. Marry me. Give Angelo the mother he desperately needs, and give me the one woman I trust to listen when everyone else fails." Patricia's eyes welled with tears, tears of profound fulfillment and overwhelming joy. The initial motivation of cold revenge had evaporated entirely, replaced by fierce, undeniable love for the broken, beautiful family she had painstakingly stitched back together. She had fallen deeply in love with the father, the vulnerable man who had faced his darkest demons for his son. "I accept your contract, Don Romano," she whispered, a radiant smile transforming her entire face. "But I will always remain Patricia Garcia, the woman who listens. And you must always be the man who truly hears her." They were married quietly in the villa's sun-drenched gardens, with Angelo standing proudly between them as the beaming ring-bearer. The intimate wedding was a beautiful testament to new beginnings, deliberately devoid of the usual criminal fanfare, focused entirely on creating a stable, loving family unit. The story of the humble nanny who conquered the Mafia Don's grief became a quiet legend whispered within the Romano circle. The failure of the powerful boss had been healed by the profound success of the brave woman who dared to confront his fear. Luca Garcia's memory was officially honored by the Romano family, his name permanently cleared of all false accusations. Patricia had achieved her mission, not through violence or destruction, but through the most powerful weapon of all, unconditional love and unwavering truth. Andrea had his heir back, and his heir had reclaimed his voice. The once silent house was now filled with laughter, playful demands, and the beautiful, complex noise of a family finally, truly whole. The story ends not with a grand criminal triumph, but with a simple, profound scene. Patricia and Andrea sit together on the nursery rug, peacefully watching Angelo confidently draw a picture of a house with 3 people standing safely inside, bathed in bright, warm yellow light. The monster was gone. The family was safe. And love had won. What would you sacrifice for justice? Have you ever had to choose between the revenge you planned and the redemption you never saw coming? Share your story, I'd love to hear it. Thank you for joining Patricia, Andrea, and Angelo on their journey from silence to voice, from vengeance to family, from broken hearts to healing love. If this story of a humble nanny who conquered a Mafia Don's grief, and a father who learned that true power comes from listening to the smallest voice, resonated with you, subscribe now, turn on notifications, and share this with someone who needs to hear that even the most wounded souls can find home in unexpected places. Remember, sometimes the family we're meant to save is the one we never expected to love. See you in the next story.